Estonian Open Air Museum. The Estonian Open Air Museum Estonian Eesti Vabaõhumuuseum is a life-sized reconstruction of an 18th-19th century rural/fishing village which includes church, tavern, schoolhouse, several mills, a fire station, 12 farmyards and sheds. Furthermore, it includes a recently opened 20th century Soviet kolkhoz apartment building and a prefabricated modern wooden house from 2019. The site spans 72 ha of land, and along with the farmyards, old public buildings are arranged singularly and in groups in a way that represents an overview of Estonian vernacular architecture of the past 2 centuries from across Estonia. The museum is located to the west of Tallinn city centre at Rocca al Mare. The plans for founding the museum were first discussed in 1913 when Estonian literati, inspired by Scandinavian Open Air Museums, wanted to establish such a museum in Estonia. It was finally established in 1957 and opened to visitors in 1964. The museum's oldest exhibit is the Suttopa Chapel of the North Sea Swedish Church, which has been reported since 1670. The most modern exhibit is a prefabricated wooden house from 2019 constructed at the museum, and the most recent exhibit that has opened to visitors in 2021 is the kolkhoz apartment building from the 1960s, brought from southern Estonia from a former collective farm. History. The Estonian National Museum, established in 1909 in Tartu, took on the creation of an open-air museum as its own task in 1913. Estonian intellectuals got the idea from visiting the open-air museums in Scandinavia and Finland and Sweden. The open-air museum Skansen was established in 1891, in Norway in 1897, in Denmark in 1901, in Finland Shiosari Open-Air Museum was established in 1909. The First World War hindered the museum from taking more serious steps. As from 1921, the resources of Estonian National Museum were spent on fitting out the Rodi Castle, and increasing economic difficulties did not enable to begin with the costly undertaking the construction of the open-air museum. In years 1925-1931, the Estonian Open Air Museum Association was active in Tallinn, and setting up the museum in the capital was under discussion. In 1920s and 1930s, the ethnographers of the Estonian National Museum, Mannainen and Fahrenheit, Linus and Chi Ring, promoted and planned the future exposition of the open-air museum. The Pirita Park Museum should have started its work on 1 July 1941, but the war began. In 1950, the Union of Architects with Kevin Tahane, Kasper H. Barmonici, Charmy and others raised the issue of setting up an open-air museum. More specific preparation activities started in 1956, this time in the Ministry of Culture. Additionally to the above-mentioned names, architects Fahrenheit, Thompson I. Sagar, and historians H. Murat G. Troska, Vers and Korzchkov were also active in the organizing committees. The museum was founded on 22 May 1957. It started its activity the same year on 1 June. In July, the museum got a plot of 66 ha near Tallinn, on the coast of Kopli Bay, in the area of Rocca al Mare Summer Manor, which was established in the 19th century. The museum under construction was opened for the visitors in August 1964. In 1974, the Open Air Museum was offered the A category. In 1975, it was visited by more than 100,000 people. On April 10, 1984, the Sassy Johnny exhibit barn dwelling and storehouse were set on fire. There had been arsons in the Open Air Museum earlier, too, in 1963, 1967, 1968 and 1978, but the Sassy Johnny exhibit buildings were of special value because of its age and interesting building construction, as there were no equivalent original buildings. A decision was made by the museum's scientific council and public commissions that a copy would be built. In the 1980s, the cultural and educational activities became more lively and new working methods were developed. Following the long-time experience of the Latvian Open Air Museum, the first handicraft fair of the Estonian Open Air Museum took place in 1988. In the 1990s, the research work was continued with the field of topics connected with improving the exposition. The study of present exhibit buildings and the history of their former owners became a new trend. Owing to the breakup of the Soviet Union and the political tensions, the visibility of the museum dropped considerably and new working methods were searched for more extensive daily handicraft sale in the museum, handicraft demonstrations, temporary exhibitions and exhibit buildings, celebrating notable days of the national calendar, as well as topical work with children started to be introduced. On 1 January 2014, the State Museum, the Estonian Open Air Museum and State Institution Conservation Centre Connaught joined and formed the foundation Estonian Open Air Museum Foundation. The foundation works as a museum that introduces rural architecture and landscape, as well as a centre that deals with restoration, conservation and digitisation. Directors of the Estonian Open Air Museum 1957-1000, 971 1972-1000, 982 1983-1000, 987 1987 -1000, 992 1993 -2018 2019. Western Estonia. Sassajani Farm. Farmers from Kolkhoz parish in the early 19th century. The buildings were brought to the museum in 1959 -1960 and opened to visitors in 1964. The threshing house and storehouse burned in 1984. The restored farm was reopened at the museum in 1993. Kustriasim Farm. Kustriasim Farm is from Kirkla village in Hadri parish. The buildings were brought to the museum from 1959 to 1962 and the farmyard was opened to visitors in 1962. The average size farm that paid rent to Hadri Church Manor had about 30 hectares of land and about 9 hectares of cropland. Nuki Farm. Nuki Smokehouse is an example of the yard of a poor inhabitant of Western Estonia on the periphery of the farm. Built from 1880 to 1890 at the former site of the Nuki Kotta in Sonia village in Lennigila parish. Brought to the museum in 1970, erected from 1970 to 1971. Netsi Windmill. Big post windmill that comes from Vanas on a farm in Netsi village, Mekli parish, the southern part of Läänemaa county in Western Estonia. Allegedly, it was built in the second half of the 19th century on Pedi Madai's farm in Rabaver village and was then sold to Netsi village in Mekli parish. The windmill was owned by different farms in the course of time, until Ants Kummel, a cotter from Vanas on a farm, bought it after the First World War. He enlarged the windmill and started to grind flour for villages in the neighbourhood. The windmill was transferred to the museum in 1959 and opened to 1960. Northern Estonia. Hedjapia Farm. This average-sized Võru County farm was purchased from the owners of Metakis Manor for 4,000 silver rubles in 1892. The farm had 44 ha of land, including 13 ha of fields. The dwelling constructed during the Empire era was later modernised, and the rooms show people's life at the end of the 1930s. The orchard and flower beds are also characteristic of the household culture of the First Republic of Estonia. The farm homestead features the outbuildings of Kotsari farm dating back to the end of the 19th century and the stone threshing floor of a ruined barn dwelling, so the composite name of Kotsari Hedjapia is also in use. The sauna is located farther away at the pond. The building was completed by the museum's jubilee in the 50th anniversary. Holga Farm. Holga Farm represents a rental farm characteristic of northern Estonia dating back to the middle of the 19th century. Farm buildings were brought from the villages of Kazolu parish to the museum in 1961-1964 and the farmyard was opened to visitors in 1964. The fact that soil in northern Estonia is rich in limestone is displayed by many buildings located in the spacious yard. The threshing floor of the barn dwelling, the smithy and summer kitchen are all made of limestone and stone hedges where large slabs of stone alternate with stonework. Art Farm. Art Farm is an example of a small farm belonging to a fisherman in the second half of the 19th century. Farm buildings have been brought from Art Farm in Verv village on Juminda Peninsula, Kazolu parish. The farm was opened for visitors in 1982. Kahala Watermill. The small watermill built on Liver Spring on Maldry Farm in Kahala village, Kazolu parish, was used to grind straight flour, wholemeal flour as well as rye coarse meal for making gruel during the spring and autumn floods. It would also make groats. Kahala Mill was one of 4 watermills of Kolkhoz Manor. The mill was brought to the museum in 1962 and opened for visitors in 1969. Southern Estonian. Sepa Farm. Sepa Farm from Rouge parish represents the household of a blacksmith in southern Estonia at the turn of the century. Brought to the museum in 1987-1997 and opened for visitors in 1999. This small farm in Võru county had some 10 ha of poor soil and smithcraft was the main source of income. Due to the changes in the economy of Estonia in the second half of the 19th century, rural handicraft developed at a fast pace. Halma Windmill. Halma Windmill, ordered by Johan Sek, was built by master mill builder Jakob Solberg in Kalmar village, Torma parish. The farmer earned the money to build the mill by fishing in Lake Peipus. Kalmar Windmill is the museum exhibit of a Dutch-type windmill which can be mainly recognised by the cap-like rotating roof with the sails. It was brought to the museum in 1972, rebuilt from 1991 to 1995. Rittu Farm. Rittu Farm is an example of a cottage household in southern Estonia. The barn dwelling in the yard was built in 1860s on Ritsu Farm in Tinakuru village, Paistu parish. The storehouse and the cattle shed have not been built yet. It was brought to the museum in 1966, rebuilt in 1968-1975. Rushi Farm. Rushi Farm from Võru county holds a special place in the museum display. All farmyard buildings except for the new storehouse were brought from Malay Rushi Farm in Pogritsa village, Karjala parish, which has a strong connection with the history of Estonian art. Namely, this was the place where the famous sculptor Johann Rodsap 1896-1984, who was then known as Duke of Farmyards, grew up on the farm of his mother's parents. Alarusi was a farm with around 36 hectares of land and 2 horses, separated from the older large Merusi farm for the family's son upon his marriage. Alarusi buildings were brought over in 1967, and the farmyard was opened for visitors in 2002. Set to farm. The old farm vernacular was situated in Lakova village called Odrava as a part of Estonia and Pankjavitsa later Valo commune, which is now in the Pskov Oblast of Russian Federation. The eastern part of Setomaa was characterized by farms that were fortified in a way. The dwelling was located in the center of a so-called 3-row yard with rows of outbuildings along 2 sides of the dwelling. There were narrow yards closed with high gates between it and the outbuildings. The ends of all the buildings faced the village street. The dwelling and the storehouse were brought to the museum in 1979. Russian house from Papus. The so-called Petchkin's house by the owner's surname, built in 1863, was brought from the town of Kalast, former Kodova parish. The peculiar Russian settlement established on the shore of Lake Papus was founded by Russian old believers who fled from Russia after the Orthodox Church descent in the 18th century. The shore villages, where soil was poor, mainly lived off fishing, growing vegetables and, later, building work. The dwelling was relocated in 1991. Islands. Jagu Farm. Jagu Farm was a homestead that was apportioned from a large estate manor to a soldier who had retired from the Tsarist army. It had 9 hectares of land, of which 2 hectares was fields. The farm was opened at the museum in 1976. Yuri Jagu Farm. Yuri Jagu Farm is an example of a 20th century tenant farm on Muir Island. The buildings were brought to the museum from 1973 to 1985, and the farm was opened to visitors in 1996. Mugu Farm had 34 hectares of land, of which 6 hectares were fields. As the stony soil and pastorelland produced little income, the members of the large family earned money to pay the rent and other expenses from seasonal work. Kolga Farm. Kolga Farm is an example of a Hiamot tenant farm and how it developed over time. The buildings are from MS Parish. The farm was opened to visitors in 1984. The role model for the typically spacious farmyard seen on Hiamot was Pendi Farm in Lelu village, which still had the old fencing that partitioned the yard. Most Hiamot islanders lived less than from the coast, and thus they were seafarers and fishermen as well as farmers. Rushta Farm. Rushta is an example of a Western Saaremaa farm and a natural barter economy system dating from the serfdom era. It was brought to the museum from Keelconna and Mostrala parishes from 1965 to 1971 and opened to the public in 1972. An average farm had around 45 ha of land, of which about 5 hectares was stony fields. The estate owner had control of the farm family itself as well as the land and buildings and fishing rights in coastal waters. Moravian Church Prayer House. The Moravian Church Prayer House was built in 1780 on Poka Farm in Tuyu village, Mostola parish. Brought to the museum in 1965. Such Moravian church prayer houses started to be built around 1738 when the movement gained many followers. A simple building with spot-on furnishings and featuring a black kitchen uncommon in Estonia reflects the tenets of the religious movement: humility, piety and belief in redemption through Christ's sacrifice and belief in the resurrection. Hiamot itinerant fishing house. This temporary residence was built in the late 19th century by Audrey Manor in Sorvey village in Audrey parish for fishermen arriving from Hiamot for the Baltic herring catch. The building was brought to the museum in 1967 and erected from 1967 to 1968. The fishing house was torched by an arsonist on the day of the August Putsche in 1991 and restored as a replica from 1991 to 1996. Net shed. Until the end of the 19th century, common net fences for one or more villages were situated on the beaches. These were the net sheds for various boat crews. Nets and other fishing tackle were stored there. The seafront in the Open Air Museum's island region features 3 net sheds from Saaremaa Island, Nassau to Malacca and Alvi. Windmills. In windy seaside areas lacking in rivers, post windmills ground grain for many generations. The entire body of the mill revolved atop a post. The small mills used on farms for single families were a sight unto themselves. They had parallels to a very ancient farm mill tradition in Scandinavia and southern Finland. Windmills were first mentioned in written documents in 14th century. Stand-alone objects. Sutulpa Chapel. Sutulpa Chapel was built in a region populated by Estonian Swedes and is one of the oldest wooden buildings in Estonia. The chapel was built in Sutulpa village of Noortsi parish as a subordinate church to Noortsi parish church. The construction cannot be precisely dated. Archival data mention the chapel as early as in 1627, but the year engraved above the church door is 1699. The chapel was brought to the museum in 1970 and erected in 1971-1976. Suttopa Chapel was reconsecrated in 1989 and has since been a subordinate church of Johnny Parish of the Estonian Evangelical Lutheran Church. Sermons are held in the chapel on major holy days and important dates of the folk calendar. Live Village Shop. Brought from Love Village of Juru Parish, Harju County. The shop building with rather a conventional floor plan was constructed in 1914 by John Mayberg, a distiller from Inglis Manor. Brought to the museum in 1999 and opened for visitors in 2012. Shops started emerging here and there in rural settlements in the last quarter of the 19th century when country population's demand for boughten goods increased. By the beginning of the 20th century, the network of village shops had been established. Apparently the shop was there in the Tsarist era, and it certainly operated from 1925 to 1940 when the Soviet rule was established. The museum display refers to 1938, the period when Estonia's economy flourished. Visitors can buy goods characteristic of that time in history. Olgretsa Fire Station. The fire station was built in 1928 in Olgretsa village, Jõevamäes parish. It was brought to the museum in 1991. Such fire stations of medium size were built by rural firefighters societies in major Estonian villages in 1920s-1930s. Olgretsa Fire Station belonged to the Arvit Albu Volunteer Firefighters Society founded in 1921. It was used to store manual fire engines with carts, barrels of water, fire hooks and so on. Hoses could be dried in the tower, where the fire bell was located as well. Kew Schoolhouse. Kew School was situated in Johnny Parish, Kew Commune. The school building was completed in 1887. With the assistance of the founders of the Rocca al Mare school, it was relocated and rebuilt in the museum in 1999, and the opening ceremony took place on 1 September 2000. From this day on, it's been a home for museum's educational centre. Kalu Tavern. Brought from Kalu village in Coast Parish, Harju County. The inn with one stable located on the road from Tallinn to Tartu was built in 1840s. Brought to the museum in 1968. Traditional Estonian meals are served at Kalu Tavern for visitors. Prefabricated wooden house. In the 21st century, Estonian wooden houses have become increasingly produced under factory-conditioned construction. Activities have moved from the site to factories with controlled conditions. Estonia has become Europe's largest exporter of wooden houses. A modern timber building constructed in the museum in 2019 is one example of the production of Estonian house manufacturers. Originally designed as an energy-efficient single-family home, the modular house introduces innovative construction technologies and materials. At the museum, the prefab wooden house accommodates the offices of the Timber Construction Competence Centre and the museum's Centre of Rural Architecture. Kolkhoz apartment building. The silicate brick apartment house was built in 1964 for the workers of the Sukuriduri Barnadjavazalu collective farm in Rebbe village, Valgad district in southern Estonia. Similar kolkhoz houses, by standard design, can be found all over Estonia, and they have become a common part of our rural landscapes. The apartment building was transported from southern Estonia to Tallinn in 2019 and opened to visitors in 2021. The building includes 4 3-room apartments, and they provide a picture of the everyday life of rural people in the 1960s, 1970s, 1990s and 2010s. In the basement, an exhibition on the development of Estonian rural life from the establishment of collective farms to the present day is set up, along with the play and activity area, which is called the World of Little Ilma. Other exhibits and attractions. Museum shop at the ticket office, which offers variety of handicraft pieces, souvenirs, copies of museum exhibits, organic sweets, Estonian wine and beer, books and folk music albums, halls, carriage rides, bicycle, scooter, cart and wheelchair rentals in summer season, kick sledge rental in winter season, a trail with 11 observation points, picnic area by the sea, guided tours, venues, rentals for events, children's playgrounds with swings and board games in the village square, and by the sea, Sergi Run Job Project Great Love / Beautiful Decay 2021. The artist renders to nature her 10-metre oil painting The Great Love 2003. The monumental painting is erected in the forest within the museum on a metal structure specially built for it and then left into the hands of the stimuli of nature. New mobile app contains a free audio guide consisting of 64 points that give an overview of the exposition of the Estonian Open Air Museum, local farm architecture, Estonian history, farm life and everyday culture in 7 languages, Estonian, Russian, English, Spanish, German, French, Italian and Finnish. It also contains orienteering adventure games to learn while solving tasks and games all over the museum in an augmented reality. The Estonian Open Air Museum is part of the geocaching game. Geocaching is an international outdoor recreational activity in which participants use a global positioning system, GPS receiver or mobile device, and other navigational techniques to hide and seek containers called geocaches or caches at specific locations marked by coordinates all over the world. More than 2,000 of them are located in Estonia, and the number of treasures is constantly increasing according to the addition of players and their activity. Events. Major events: Rovtide, Easter, Midsummer Eve, Estonian Bread Day, Michaelmas Street, Martin's Day, Street Catherine's Day, Christmas Village in summer. Performances of the Kolkhoz Society Lega Rid every Saturday and Sunday at 11:00 on Sassy Johnny Farm. Conservation and Digitization Centre Connacht. Based on the restoration departments of the National Museum of Art and National Open Air Museum, the National Restoration Centre was established on 1 December 1986. The task of the centre was to service the museum's under Ministry of Culture of that time ESA Committee of Culture, and to assist other memory institutions. The idea of the Restoration Centre was initiated and set going by a recognised leather artist and conservator Endel Falk, who worked as a manager of the centre since its establishment until 1995. The Restoration Centre got rooms for working in the old town of Tallinn in the building of the former printing house Communist at Pakestia 2, where they work also today. 8 workshops were open in the centre: ethographic and polychromic wood, furniture, painting, leather, textile, ceramics, metal and paper restoration workshops. The centre also started to organise consultations and training for museum specialists and conservators. From 1988, a professional magazine, Renovatimano, was issued. In 1990, the institution was named as Conservation Centre Connacht, which was derived from Nodlavard, the name of a Danish duke who was also known as a patron saint of the craftsmen who were active in Tallinn for centuries. From 2005, the Conservation Centre Connacht also provides a digitization service of the items of cultural value. Centre for Rural Architecture. In 2007, a programme for the study and maintenance of Estonian rural architecture was launched at the Estonian Open Air Museum. In 2012, the implementers of this programme formed a separate department under the name of the Centre of Rural Architecture of the Estonian Open Air Museum. Centre of Rural Architecture is doing research on Estonian vernacular architecture, organising seminars and consultation service for house owners. The centre received the Grand Prix of the EU Prize for Cultural Heritage / Europe Nostra Award 2015 in the Education, Training and Awareness Raising category with the programme for owners of rural buildings in Estonia. Choir. In 2008, a mixed choir was founded within the Estonian Open Air Museum, and the next year, in 2009, the group participated for first time in the National Song Festival in Estonian, Laulupidu. Awards. On June 11, 2015, the Centre of Rural Architecture of the Estonian Open Air Museum received the Grand Prix of the EU Prize for Cultural Heritage / Europe Nostra Award 2015 in the Education, Training and Awareness Raising category with the programme for owners of rural buildings in Estonia. Gallery. Image Sassy Johnny 1. JPG The oldest farmstead in the museum, Sassy Johnny 18th-19th century image, Satopa Chapel, JPG Satopa Chapel, 19th century image, Kahu Tavern, JPG Kahu Tavern, 19th century image, Kahala Watermill, JPG Kahala Watermill, 19th century image, Estonian Open Air Museum, 7. JPG Netsi Unmill to grind grain,